What if the person you've loved in silence for years is right in front of you, but saying the truth could shatter everything? This is the story of Eli and Lila, where every glance hides a secret, every word is a risk, and the weight of unspoken love threatens to tear their world apart. Get ready for a journey filled with jealousy, heartbreak, and a fight for a love that it's been buried too long. This is not just a story, it's an emotional storm you won't be able to look away from. Subscribe now because the truth is coming, and when it finally breaks free, will it bring them together or destroy everything they've ever known?
Chapter 1: Echoes of the Past. The afternoon sun, typically a cheerful presence in Eli Carter's small apartment, seemed to cast longer, more melancholic shadows today. It highlighted the dust motes dancing in the air and, more prominently, the framed photograph on his modest desk. 3 figures grinned back at him from the glossy surface. Him, younger and ganglier. Mason, already radiating the same boisterous energy he possessed now. And nestled between them, a 15-year-old Lila. Even in the faded print, Lila was a force. Braces glinted on her teeth as she flashed a sarcastic grin, her eyes, even then, holding a sharpness that belied her age. She wore a hoodie that could have swallowed a small car, the fabric practically drowning her slender frame, but nothing could diminish the spark of her personality. Eli remembered that day vividly, a chaotic backyard barbecue at the Millers, Mason's family, where Lila had expertly deflected his clumsy attempts at conversation with witty retorts, leaving him both flustered and utterly charmed. A decade had passed since that photograph was taken, a decade Eli had spent meticulously, painstakingly, burying a secret that breathed and moved and laughed in the form of Lila Miller. He was Eli Carter, the quiet one, the steady presence in Mason's orbit. Mason, his best friend since kindergarten, was the sun around which Eli often orbited, and by extension, Lila was a satellite, always there, always a part of his landscape. He'd watched her grow from that hoodie-clad, sarcastic teenager into the confident, sharp-witted woman she was now, and with every passing year, his feelings for her deepened, twisting into something complex and stubbornly persistent. He traced the outline of her face in the photo with his thumb, a familiar ache settling in his chest. Why had he never said anything? The reasons were a well-worn path in his mind, each turn leading to the same dead end. First, there was Mason. Mason, who was like a brother. How could Eli, in good conscience, betray that trust? The thought of jeopardizing their friendship, of turning their easy camaraderie into something strained or, worse, shattered, was a weight too heavy to bear. He pictured Mason's booming laugh, his unwavering loyalty, and the image of that fading was enough to keep Eli's lips sealed. Then there was Lila herself. She was Mason's little sister, practically off limits from the start. And even when she grew past that little sister phase, there always seemed to be someone else in her life. Boyfriends through high school, a serious partner in college, then another during her first few years out in the world. The timing was never right, he told himself, conveniently overlooking the fact that he'd never made it right. He'd let opportunities slip through his fingers like grains of sand, convincing himself it was for the best, that his feelings were a burden only he should carry. The fear of rejection, stark and raw, also played its part. What if she didn't feel the same way? What if the thought of him, quiet Eli, harboring such intense feelings for her, was repulsive? Better to exist as a silent, ever-present friend than to risk everything and lose her completely. He sighed, the sound barely disturbing the stillness of the room. It was a well-practiced sigh, one that carried the weight of years of unspoken longing. He'd perfected the art of casual observation, of listening intently to her stories about her life, her work, her heartbreaks, all while carefully constructing an invisible wall around his own emotions. He was her friend, her confidant, Mason's reliable third wheel. It was a role he cherished, even if it often felt like wearing a suit of armor designed to protect her from his truth. The shrill ring of his phone shattered his reverie, making him jump. It was Mason. Eli swiped to answer, forcing a casual tone into his voice. "Hey, man, what's up?" "Eli, perfect timing. Just about to call you. Guess what? Lake cabin trip next weekend. You're in, right?" Mason's voice boomed through the speaker, already assuming Eli's compliance. The annual lake cabin trip was a tradition, a cornerstone of their friendship. Eli rarely missed it. "Yeah, of course," Eli said, a wave of calm washing over him. The cabin was a sanctuary, a place where the three of them could just be. Simple, easy. Awesome! Even better news, Lila's coming this year, Mason added, his voice tinged with genuine excitement. She's back in town for a bit after, needs a little R&R. Thought it'd be good for her to get away from the city. The calm shattered. Lila, here, at the cabin, for an entire weekend, just the three of them, secluded. Eli's mind raced, a sudden panic rising in his throat. He hadn't seen her properly in months, not since her last whirlwind visit. The thought of being in close quarters with her, of navigating those unspoken feelings, sent a jolt through him. He almost said no. He could invent an excuse, a sudden work deadline, a last-minute family obligation. His finger hovered over the end call button, poised to fabricate a polite refusal. "Hey, Eli, you there? I put you on speaker. Lila wants to say hi." Mason's voice broke through his internal debate. "Hi, Eli?" Lila's voice, bright and clear, echoed from Mason's end. There was a teasing lilt to it, a familiar warmth that instantly disarmed him. "Heard you were getting roped into our annual rustic adventure? Brace yourself for Mason's questionable grilling skills." Eli felt a nervous laugh bubble up. "Hey, Lila, wouldn't miss it for the world, even for Mason's burnt burgers." "That's the spirit," she chirped. "It'll be fun. See you next Friday?" "See you Friday," Eli said, his voice a little steadier than he felt. He hung up the phone, his heart thrumming against his ribs. The words had tumbled out before he could stop himself. Yes, he was going, and Layla would be there. He looked at the photograph again, her smiling face seeming to mock his carefully constructed composure. A decade of silence, a decade of quiet yearning. And now, in a single phone call, everything felt poised to shift. The cabin, usually a place of simple relaxation, now loomed as a crucible. He was walking directly into the very situation he had spent years avoiding. And deep down, in a place he rarely dared to acknowledge, a tiny spark of dangerous hope flickered. This might just be the weekend that broke him. Chapter 2, Something's Different. The drive to the lake cabin, typically a relaxed affair filled with Mason's booming anecdotes and Eli's quiet amusement, felt different this year. Lila sat in the back, her presence a tangible hum in the small space of Mason's SUV. She wasn't the hoodie-wearing teenager from Eli's memories, nor the slightly frazzled post-college grad he'd last seen. The past few months, perhaps the recent breakup, had sculpted her into someone new, subtly refined. She wore a simple, fitted denim shirt that highlighted the gentle curve of her collarbones, and her hair, usually a messy ponytail, now fell in soft waves around her shoulders, catching the sunlight. Her laughter, once sharp and quick, had a deeper, more resonant quality. Eli caught himself watching her in the rearview mirror, pretending to adjust it. He noted the way her brow furrowed in concentration as she scrolled through her phone, the small, unconscious gesture of pushing a stray strand of hair behind her ear. Every detail, every fleeting expression seemed to etch itself into his mind with a new clarity. He'd always observed Lila, but now it felt like he was seeing her for the first time, or perhaps seeing the woman she truly was beneath the layers of their shared history. Earth to Eli? "You planning on driving us into a ditch?" Mason's voice, jarringly loud, pulled him back to the present. "Just admiring the scenery," Eli mumbled, flushing slightly. He could feel Lila's eyes on him for a brief second before she turned back to her window. Had she noticed his gaze? He hoped not. He really, desperately hoped not. They arrived at the familiar log cabin, nestled by the shimmering lake, its scent of pine and old wood a comforting constant. Unloading the car, however, became a dance of accidental intimacies. Eli found himself reaching for the same bag as Lila, their fingers brushing, sending a jolt up his arm. In the compact kitchen, preparing lunch, their shoulders brushed as they moved past each other. Each contact, however fleeting, felt electric, sending a nervous flutter through Eli's stomach. He'd glance at her, and sometimes her eyes would already be on him, a curious, almost searching look in their depths. "You okay, Eli?" Leela asked once, as he nearly dropped a bag of chips. Her voice was soft, laced with genuine concern. "Yeah, fine, just hungry," he lied, forcing a weak smile. He could feel the heat rising in his cheeks. "Hungry? Really, Eli?" She didn't press, but her gaze lingered a beat too long, an unreadable expression on her face. Eli quickly turned to Mason, launching into a question about the fishing rods, desperate to break the quiet tension that seemed to be growing between him and Lila. Later that afternoon, Mason decided a swim was in order. He stripped down to his swim trunks with typical lack of ceremony and cannonballed into the cool lake water with a triumphant shout. Lila, after a moment's hesitation, followed, her movements graceful as she dove in. Eli watched them, feeling a strange mix of longing and apprehension. He loved the lake, loved the simple joy of these trips, but everything felt sharper, more intense with Lila here, particularly with her. He finally peeled off his shirt and joined them, the cold water a welcome shock that momentarily cleared his head. They splashed, raced, and laughed, the familiar rhythm of their friendship asserting itself. But even in the midst of their play, Eli found his gaze continually drifting to Lila. He noticed the way the water beaded on her skin, the sparkle in her eyes as she laughed at Mason's antics, the easy way she moved through the water. He was no longer just enjoying the moment. He was acutely aware of her in the moment. Back on the small dock, toweling off, Lila sat beside him, dangling her feet in the water. Mason was already making a beeline for the cabin, proclaiming his hunger. A comfortable silence settled between them, broken only by the gentle lapping of waves against the shore. Eli found himself stealing glances at her profile, the curve of her jaw, the way her wet hair clung to her neck. "You've been quiet today," Lila finally said, her voice soft, almost a murmur. She wasn't accusing, just observing. Eli swallowed, his throat suddenly dry. Just enjoying the peace. Been a hectic few weeks at work. It was a half-truth, enough to sound plausible. She hummed, tracing patterns in the water with her toes. "Yeah, I get that. My brain feels like scrambled eggs after everything." She didn't elaborate on everything, but Eli knew it referred to her breakup. A part of him wanted to offer comfort, to ask about it, but another part, the one terrified of crossing an invisible line, held him back. "You okay?" he managed, feeling incredibly inadequate. Lila turned her head then, her gaze direct, unwavering. Her eyes, the same warm brown as Mason's but somehow deeper, seemed to look right through him. "I will be," she said, her voice laced with a resilience he admired. "But it's funny. Being back here, seeing you guys, it makes me think about things, like how some things never change and some things definitely do." She smiled then, a small, knowing smile that sent a shiver down Eli's spine. Was she talking about them? Was she subtly acknowledging the shift he felt, the invisible current pulling them closer? He wanted to ask, to push the conversation further, but the words caught in his throat. He just nodded, hoping his expression conveyed some semblance of understanding. That night, lying in the familiar creak of the cabin's guest bed, Eli didn't sleep. The day replayed in his mind. The accidental touches, the lingering gazes, Lila's subtle questions, her knowing smile. He told himself it was nothing, just his own heightened awareness, his own wishful thinking, projecting meaning onto innocent interactions. It had to be nothing. He'd spent a decade building this wall, maintaining this distance, for a reason. He couldn't let it crumble now, not when the stakes felt higher than ever. But as the moon cast long shadows through the window, Eli couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted, and he wasn't sure if he was ready for what that might mean. Chapter 3. Night Swim. The cabin settled into a comfortable quiet after dinner. Mason, true to form, was already snoring softly on the living room couch, a half-empty bag of chips resting on his chest. The only light came from the flickering embers in the stone fireplace, casting dancing shadows on the rustic walls. Eli sat by the window, ostensibly reading a book, but his gaze kept drifting to the dark expanse of the lake outside, reflecting the scattered stars like a shattered mirror. "It's too beautiful a night to be cooped up." Lila's voice, soft and unexpected, made him jump slightly. She was standing in the doorway, a towel draped over her arm, her silhouette framed against the dim light from the kitchen. "Moon's almost full. Fancy a swim?" Eli's heart gave a familiar lurch. A swim. Just the two of them. Mason was clearly out for the count. This was the kind of intimate, that spontaneous moment he'd both yearned for and dreaded. Every instinct screamed at him to decline, to make an excuse about being tired or needing to finish his book. But then he looked at her, at the hopeful glint in her eyes, and the words died in his throat. "Sure," he managed, his voice a little rougher than he intended. "Sounds good." She smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile that made his chest ache. "Great. Meet you down at the dock in 5. He nodded, watching her disappear back into the kitchen. He quickly changed into his swim trunks, his movements clumsy with anticipation. The air outside was cool, carrying the crisp scent of pine and damp earth. The moon, a luminous pearl, hung low over the lake, painting a silvery path across the water. Lila was already at the edge of the dock when he arrived, her figure bathed in moonlight. She wore a dark swimsuit, simple and elegant, that somehow managed to be both modest and incredibly alluring. He tried not to stare, focusing instead on the vast, quiet beauty of the night. "Ready?" she whispered, her voice barely disturbing the stillness. "As I'll ever be," he replied, and with a shared glance they slipped into the water. The lake, surprisingly, wasn't as cold as he'd expected. It was a refreshing embrace, chasing away the lingering anxieties of the day. They swam slowly, side by side, for a few minutes, the only sounds the gentle splash of their strokes and the distant chirping of crickets. There was a comfortable silence between them, a shared appreciation for the moment. After a while, they drifted to a shallower spot, treading water, their heads just above the surface. The moon cast their faces in a soft, ethereal glow, making her eyes seem even deeper, more mysterious. "This is nice," Lila said, breaking the silence. "Always loved night swims here. Feels like the world just stops." "It does," Eli agreed, his gaze fixed on her. He felt a strange sense of peace, coupled with an almost unbearable awareness of her proximity. The water was electric, the air between them charged with something unspoken. She tilted her head slightly, her eyes searching his. "So," she began, her voice casual, but with an underlying current of curiosity, "I've been meaning to ask you something." Eli braced himself. He knew, instinctively, that this wasn't going to be about Mason's questionable grilling skills. "Why haven't you ever really dated anyone seriously, Eli?" Her question hung in the air, direct and disarmingly personal. "I mean, you're a great guy, smart, funny, loyal. You've always been around, but I've never seen you with anyone for more than a few months. Not like Mason, or anyone." His heart hammered against his ribs. This was it, the moment he'd always dreaded. How could he answer without revealing everything, without shattering the delicate balance of their friendship? He felt a sudden chill despite the relatively warm water. "Oh, he stammered, trying to sound nonchalant. "Just busy, I guess. Work's been pretty demanding, and honestly, haven't really met anyone who clicked." He forced a laugh, hoping it sounded convincing. "Dating scene in the city is brutal anyway." Lila's gaze didn't waver. She didn't smile, didn't offer a sympathetic nod. Her eyes, luminous in the moonlight, seemed to look right through his flimsy excuses. "Busy?" she repeated, a hint of skepticism in her tone. "Ely, you're one of the most organized people I know, and brutal dating scene is a cop-out. You're not the type to just give up." He floundered, searching for another lie, another evasion. "No, I just haven't prioritized it, I guess. Been focused on other things." She continued to hold his gaze, her expression unreadable. The silence stretched, filled only by the gentle lapping of the water. It was a silence that spoke volumes, a silence that told him she didn't believe a word he was saying. Her eyes lingered on his, a silent challenge, a quiet understanding that went beyond words. It felt as though she was seeing past his carefully constructed facade, glimpsing the truth he desperately tried to hide. Finally, she broke the stare, turning her head to look at the moon. "Okay," she said simply, her voice softer now, "if you say so." But the way she said it, the slight pause, the knowing tone, told him she didn't say so. She knew. Or at least she suspected. They swam back to the dock in silence, the earlier ease replaced by a palpable tension. As they climbed out, the cool night air felt sharper, the distance between them wider than the few feet of dock. Back in his room, Eli lay awake, staring at the dark ceiling. The moonlit swim, meant to be a moment of peaceful connection, had become an interrogation. Lila's questions echoed in his mind, each one a direct hit to the wall he'd built around his feelings. Her lingering gaze, her quiet disbelief, they were a testament to her intuition, a terrifying confirmation that his secret might not be as well guarded as he thought. He replayed every word, every glance, searching for a clue, a sign. Had he given too much away? Did she suspect the truth? The thought sent a jolt of fear and a strange, exhilarating hope through him. Sleep was an impossible dream that night. He was too busy replaying the electric air, the searching eyes, and the question that had almost broken him. Chapter 4. His secret Eli awoke to the insistent chirping of birds and the faint aroma of coffee brewing, a stark contrast to the restless, moonlit hours he just endured. His eyelids felt heavy, gritty from lack of sleep. The memory of Lila's probing questions during the night swim, her knowing gaze, was still disturbingly fresh. He felt exposed, as if a thin veil had been lifted, revealing a glimpse of the carefully guarded secret he'd carried for years. He dragged himself out of bed and into the kitchen, where Mason was already nursing a mug of coffee, scrolling through his phone. Lila was at the counter, meticulously arranging slices of fruit on a plate. She glanced up as he entered, and for a fleeting second, their eyes met. There was no direct accusation, no pointed stare, just a quiet acknowledgement that something had passed between them the night before. Eli quickly averted his gaze, busying himself with pouring a cup of coffee. As he sipped the hot liquid, trying to feel more human, his mind drifted back, not to last night's tension, but to an earlier, equally potent memory. It was a cold, rainy November night, 6 years ago. Lila was in her second year of college, miles away in a different state. He remembered the phone call vividly, her voice, tight with panic, telling Mason that her old beat-up sedan had broken down in the middle of nowhere. Mason had groaned, muttering about deadlines and needing to be at work early. Eli, without a moment's hesitation, had volunteered. He'd packed a toolbox, grabbed a thermos of coffee, and set off into the night. 5 hours of relentless rain, the hum of the highway, and the gnawing anxiety of wanting to get to her. He hadn't told Mason he was going, knowing Mason would protest the distance and the late hour. He just went. He found her huddled by the side of the road, wrapped in a thin blanket, shivering, a flimsy umbrella doing little against the downpour. But the moment she saw his headlights, her face, pale with worry, lit up. "Eli!" she'd cried, her voice laced with relief, running to meet him. That was the moment. The way her small hand had clutched his arm, the genuine gratitude in her eyes, the sheer relief that he was there. He remembered kneeling in the cold puddles, flashlight clamped between his teeth, fixing the alternator. She'd sat on the curb under his larger umbrella, quietly handing him tools, her presence a warm, comforting anchor in the miserable weather. They hadn't talked much, just the practicalities of the repair. But as he'd driven her back to her dorm, the heater blasting, a strange, undeniable warmth had spread through his chest. It wasn't just friendship, it was something deeper, something protective and profoundly affectionate. He'd realized then, with a jolt that felt like a physical blow, that he was utterly, irrevocably in love with her. The realization had been terrifying. She was Mason's sister. And she was dating someone then, a charming but ultimately forgettable guy named Mark. Eli had driven back that night, exhausted but strangely exhilarated and resolved to bury his feelings. He never spoke of that 5-hour drive to fix her car, not to Mason, and certainly not to Lila. It became his secret, a foundational truth about his heart that no one else knew. He never allowed himself to hope, because hope, he'd learned, was a dangerous thing when it came to loving someone off limits. Back in the present, the clatter of a plate brought him back. Lila was setting down a tray of toast. She caught him staring again, but this time her expression wasn't curious or searching, but something softer, almost understanding. It was a look that seemed to say, "I see you, Eli, even if I don't know what I'm seeing." "Everything okay?" she asked, her voice quiet. "Yeah," Eli said, clearing his throat. "Just remembering old times." He offered a small, genuine smile. A part of him, the reckless part that had awakened during the night swim, wondered if the way she looked at him now, this subtle shift in her demeanor, meant something real. Or if it was, as always, just his imagination, his own desperate hope, projecting meaning onto innocent interactions. He gripped his coffee mug, the warmth a small comfort against the persistent chill of his uncertainty. The wall around his heart felt thinner than ever, threatening to crack under the pressure of proximity and unspoken emotion. Chapter 5, Jealousy. The morning after the moonlit swim and Eli's quiet internal journey through his past, a fragile truce seemed to settle over the cabin. Breakfast was a subdued affair, punctuated by Mason's usual cheerful chatter about fishing plans. Lila was quiet, occasionally glancing at Eli, her expression unreadable. Eli, for his part, kept his focus on his plate, acutely aware of her every movement, every soft sound she made. The air between them, though not overtly hostile, hummed with the unspoken, a delicate tension that only they seemed to perceive. Around mid-morning, just as Mason was rigging his fishing rod by the dock, a dusty pickup truck rumbled up the gravel driveway. A tall, lean guy with an easy smile and sun-streaked hair hopped out. "Mason, good to see you, man," he called, striding towards them. "Chase! What's up, buddy?" Mason clapped him on the back. "Lila, Eli, this is Chase. He's got the cabin down the road. We used to hit the trails together in high school." Chase turned, his smile widening as his gaze landed on Lila. Well, hello there. Mason never mentioned he had such a charming sister. His eyes lingered on her, openly appreciative, and a flicker of something Eli couldn't quite name, possessiveness, ignited in his gut. Lila, ever gracious, offered a polite smile. "Nice to meet you, Chase." "Likewise, Lila," he purred, his tone a little too smooth for Eli's liking. "So, you here for the weekend?" "Just for a few days," Lila replied, a faint blush rising on her cheeks. Eli noticed it immediately, and a knot tightened in his stomach. Chase, clearly undeterred by Mason's presence, leaned against the porch railing, effortlessly charming. He launched into a story about a recent hiking trip, his eyes frequently darting to Layla, making her laugh with his exaggerated gestures. Eli stood awkwardly to the side, trying to appear engaged in Mason's fishing talk, but his ears were tuned to every word, every laugh that escaped Lila's lips. He watched as Chase, with a casualness that felt infuriatingly deliberate, reached out and lightly touched Lila's arm as he made a point. Lila didn't pull away. She even leaned in slightly, captivated by his story. A cold wave washed over Eli. This wasn't just friendly banter. This was open, unadulterated flirting. And Lila, perhaps enjoying the attention after her recent breakup, or perhaps Eli's paranoid mind suggested, trying to elicit a reaction from him, was flirting back. "So, Lila, you ever tried paddleboarding on this lake?" Chase asked, his voice low and inviting. "I've got a couple of boards. Could show you the ropes, maybe later this afternoon?" Lila's eyes lit up. "Oh, I've always wanted to try that. That sounds amazing. See, Eli? Lila's got some adventure in her." Mason boomed, completely oblivious to the storm brewing within Eli. "You two go for it. I'm going to try my luck with these bass." Eli's jaw clenched. He felt a hot, unfamiliar surge of anger. He wanted to shout, to pull Lila away, to remind Chase that she wasn't just some casual acquaintance. But he couldn't. He was Eli, the quiet friend, the one who never made a fuss. He just stood there, a silent, fuming observer. "Great," Chase grinned, his gaze sweeping over Lila again. "I'll come by around 2, then." "Perfect," Lila beamed. As Chase finally took his leave, promising to return, Eli felt a suffocating tightness in his chest. He turned away, pretending to examine a loose plank on the porch. The image of Chase's hand on Lila's arm, her bright smile, the easy way she'd agreed to spend time with him. It all churned inside him. "Well, he seems nice," Mason commented, completely missing Eli's rigid posture. "Good for Lila to get out and about. She's been cooped up too long." Eli barely grunted in response. He felt a desperate urge to tell Mason, to scream out his frustration, but the words were trapped behind a wall of fear and pride. Later, as Lila changed into her swimsuit for paddleboarding, Eli found himself alone in the kitchen, washing dishes with unnecessary vigor. He could hear Lila's light footsteps upstairs, then the creak of the screen door as she headed towards the dock. The thought of her out there with Chase, laughing, perhaps even touching, was unbearable. He slammed a plate down a little too hard, making a loud clatter. Lila, who had just re-entered the kitchen to grab a water bottle, jumped. "Whoa, easy there, Tiger," she said, a hint of amusement in her voice. "Everything okay, Eli? You've been a little intense all morning." Her casual tone, her oblivious smile, snapped something inside him. All the suppressed frustration, the years of silent longing, the fear of losing her, and now the raw jealousy coalesced into a bitter retort. "Yeah, I'm fine," he said, his voice flat, colder than he intended. He didn't look at her, just tired of watching people make the same mistakes over and over again. Lila's amusement vanished, replaced by confusion, then hurt. Her brow furrowed. "Excuse me? What is that supposed to mean?" He finally turned to her, his eyes hard. "It means exactly what it sounds like. Some people just never learn. They chase after the shiny new thing, the easy distraction, instead of seeing what's right in front of them." He knew he wasn't making sense, that his words were a clumsy, veiled attack, But he couldn't stop himself. The pain of his own unrequited feelings was too sharp. Lila stared at him, her lips parting slightly in disbelief. The color drained from her face. Her eyes, which moments before had held a spark of light, now clouded with genuine hurt. "Ellie," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "What are you talking about? Are you talking about me?" He couldn't meet her gaze. He knew he'd gone too far, that his jealousy had twisted his words into something cruel. But the confession, the explanation, felt too monumental to utter. Without another word, Lila's face fell, her shoulders slumping. She turned away, picked up her water bottle, and walked out of the kitchen, the screen door closing softly behind her. Eli heard her footsteps receding, then the faint sound of her meeting Chase by the lake. He was left alone in the quiet kitchen, the scent of fresh coffee now tainted by the bitter taste of regret. He had done it. He had snapped. And in doing so, he had probably hurt the one person he desperately wanted to protect. The silence that followed her departure was deafening, filled only by the echo of his own harsh words and the crushing weight of his immediate, profound remorse. Chapter 6, The Fight. The afternoon stretched on, heavy and suffocating. Eli spent it holed up in his room, ostensibly organizing his backpack, but in reality replaying his cruel words to Lila over and over. Each time they sounded harsher, more unwarranted. He felt a deep, churning shame. His jealousy, a beast he usually kept caged, had broken free and lashed out at the one person he least wanted to hurt. He heard the distant sounds of laughter from the lake, knowing it was Lila and Chase, and the sound only amplified his self-loathing. He finally emerged when the sun began to dip below the tree line, painting the sky in fiery oranges and purples. He needed air, needed to escape the confines of his guilt. He found Mason by the fire pit, patiently coaxing a flame from a pile of kindling. Lila was nowhere in sight. "Hey, man," Mason said, without looking up. "You okay? You've been a ghost all afternoon." "Just had some stuff to do," Eli mumbled, avoiding eye contact. He wanted to ask about Lila, about her paddleboarding session with Chase, but the words felt too heavy, too loaded. Just then, the screen door creaked open, and Leela stepped out onto the porch. Her hair was still damp from the lake, and she had changed into a soft, oversized sweater, but her eyes, when they met Eli's, were cold and distant. She didn't acknowledge him, walking straight past to grab a blanket from a chair. Eli felt his stomach clench. This was worse than an argument. This was the quiet, chilling disapproval that cut him to the bone. He had to fix it. He had to apologize. He waited until Mason had gone inside to grab more firewood. This was his chance. He walked over to where Lila was wrapping the blanket around herself, her back to him. "Leela," he started, his voice low, filled with genuine remorse. "Look, about earlier? I'm really sorry. That was out of line. I didn't mean it." She turned slowly, her expression unyielding. Her eyes, usually so expressive, were shuttered. "Didn't mean what, Eli? That I make the same mistakes? That I'm chasing shiny new things?" Her voice was quiet, but it held a sharp edge that made him flinch. "Because it sure sounded like you meant it. And frankly, I don't appreciate being judged by you, especially when you refuse to even say what you're actually upset about." He opened his mouth, then closed it. How could he explain the irrational surge of jealousy, the decade of suppressed feelings, the terror of seeing her with someone else? It all sounded insane. I was just in a bad mood," he stammered, hating the weakness in his voice. "It had nothing to do with you. I just lashed out." Lila scoffed, a short, humorless sound. "Don't lie to me, Eli. Not you. Not after all these years. Something's clearly bothering you, and it has everything to do with me. Or at least, with what you think you know about me." She took a step closer, her voice dropping to an intense whisper. "You've been acting weird since I got here. Distant, then overly attentive, then snapping at me for no reason. What is going on?" Her directness was disarming. He wanted to retreat, to deflect, but her gaze held him captive. She wouldn't let him off the hook. This wasn't a casual disagreement. This was a demand for truth. "It's nothing, Lila, really." He tried again, his voice weak even to his own ears. "Nothing?" she challenged, her eyes narrowing. "Nothing. You just said something incredibly hurtful to me out of nowhere, and you expect me to believe it's nothing? I'm tired of it, Eli. I'm tired of the vague comments, the strange looks. If you have something to say, just say it. What is it that you don't like watching me with?" He swallowed hard, his throat dry. The words were right there, on the tip of his tongue, threatening to burst free. The dam was cracking. He could feel it. The raw emotion, the years of longing, were pushing against his carefully constructed defenses. I just don't like watching you with someone who doesn't see you the way I do," he finally blurted out, the words tumbling out in a rush, half confession, half frustration. It was a clumsy, indirect truth, but it was the closest he'd ever come to admitting the depth of his feelings. Silence. The only sound was the crackle of the nascent fire behind them. Lila's eyes widened, a flicker of surprise, then something else. Recognition, passing through them. Her lips parted slightly, as if she was about to speak, to ask for clarification. The air thickened, charged with the weight of his admission. Then her voice, barely a whisper, filled the space between them. "And how do you see me, Eli?" His breath hitched. This was it, the moment of truth. He could tell her everything. The years of quiet adoration, the moments he'd watched her from afar, the way he saw her strength, her vulnerability, her brilliance. He opened his mouth, the first word already forming on his lips. "All right, fire's almost ready. Who's hungry?" Mason's booming voice shattered the fragile intimacy. He strode out of the cabin, a large armload of firewood tucked under one arm, completely oblivious to the intense, unspoken confrontation he had just interrupted. Eli froze, his gaze darting from Lila's stunned face to Mason's cheerfully oblivious one. The moment so potent just seconds before evaporated like mist in the morning sun. The opportunity, so agonizingly close, was gone. Lila quickly turned away, her expression unreadable once more, as Mason began to arrange the firewood around the pit. Eli felt a profound sense of deflation, a crushing disappointment that was almost physical. The truth had been within reach, and it had slipped through his fingers, leaving him stranded in the familiar territory of silence and regret. Chapter 7. Mason Knows. The scent of roasting marshmallows and burning firewood usually brought Eli a sense of nostalgic comfort, but tonight it felt suffocating. The aborted conversation with Lila still hung in the air between them, a tangible, humming silence. She was quiet, almost withdrawn, and though Mason tried to draw her out, her responses were clipped, her gaze pointedly avoiding Eli. Eli himself felt like a live wire, every nerve frayed, every word he might say scrutinized before it even left his lips. After dinner, as Lila excused herself to get ready for bed, Mason leaned back against his log, swirling the last bit of coffee in his mug. He watched Lila disappear into the cabin, then turned to Eli, his expression no longer jovial. The easygoing mask had slipped, revealing a rare seriousness. "All right, Eli," Mason began, his voice low, a stark contrast to his usual booming tone. "Spill it." Eli's stomach dropped. He knew immediately what Mason was talking about. His mind raced, searching for a deflection, a new lie. "Spill what? What are you talking about, man?" He tried, feigning innocence, though his heart hammered against his ribs. Mason scoffed, a short, humorless sound. "Don't play dumb. I'm not blind, Eli, or deaf for that matter. I've been watching you two all weekend. The way you look at her when she's not looking, the way she looks at you. The tension between you two is thicker than my morning coffee." He paused, taking a long sip. "And then there was that little exchange you two had by the fire pit just now, before I walked out. What was that about?" Eli gripped his own mug so tightly his knuckles turned white. This was it, the moment of reckoning. He could deny it, keep up the charade, but Mason's eyes were too steady, too knowing. His best friend, the one person he truly couldn't lie to, was looking right through him. "It's complicated, Mason," Eli mumbled, unable to meet his gaze. He stared into the flickering flames, watching them consume the wood, wishing they could consume his secret too. "Complicated?" Mason repeated, his voice hardening slightly. "Complicated usually means someone's getting hurt, and I have a very strong feeling about who that might be." He set his mug down with a decisive thud. "Look, Eli, you're my best friend, but Lila's my sister, my little sister. She's been through a lot lately, and the last thing she needs is whatever this is." Mason leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his gaze finally forcing Eli to meet it. "So, I'm going to ask you directly, and I want a straight answer. Do you have feelings for Lila?" The question hung in the cool night air, heavy and inescapable. Eli's throat felt tight, words caught somewhere between his chest and his lips. The denial was so ingrained, so practiced, that it almost slipped out automatically. No, of course not. She's like a sister to me. But the lie tasted bitter, like ash. Mason deserved the truth, or at least something closer to it than he'd ever given. He exhaled slowly, letting years of carefully guarded emotion escape in a shaky breath. Yes, he finally admitted, the word barely a whisper. Yet it felt like a thunderclap in the quiet night. It was the first time he had ever uttered those words aloud, to anyone, let alone Mason. The confession left him feeling hollowed out, exposed, and strangely, profoundly relieved. Mason's expression didn't change, but his eyes softened almost imperceptibly. He didn't shout, didn't rage. He just studied Eli for a long moment, a myriad of emotions playing across his face. Surprise, understanding, a touch of concern. How long? Mason asked, his voice still quiet. Eli hesitated. A long time. Years. He looked away again, ashamed. Since college? Maybe even before. I don't know, it just happened. Mason rubbed a hand over his face. Right, I should have seen it. I guess I just never thought about it that way. You two were always just you two. He paused, then continued, his voice firm. Look, Eli, I trust you. I really do. You're family. But if this is real, if you do have feelings for her, you need to be careful. Eli finally looked at him, bracing himself for the lecture, the anger. If you do, Mason continued, his words slow and deliberate, just don't hurt her. She's been through enough. And if you're going to step into her life in a way that's more than just a friend, then you need to be all in. No half measures. She deserves that. We deserve that. He didn't push for details about Eli's past behavior or the reasons for his long silence. He didn't threaten to cut him off. Mason simply laid out the stakes, placing the burden of responsibility squarely on Eli's shoulders. His words, though not a prohibition, were a profound warning. They echoed in Eli's mind, heavy with the weight of both trust and protectiveness. The confession, meant to be a relief, now felt like a terrifying commitment. He had admitted his feelings, but the path forward was still shrouded in fear, haunted by the possibility of losing everything. Chapter 8. The kiss that didn't happen. The air grew heavy with the quiet anticipation of the cabin's last night. Mason, after his conversation with Eli, had adopted a subtly watchful demeanor. He didn't hover, but Eli could feel his presence, a silent reminder of the weight of his confession. Lila, for her part, remained distant, a cool politeness now firmly in place, a stark contrast to the fleeting warmth they'd shared earlier in the weekend. The unresolved tension from their aborted fight, coupled with Chase's brief intrusion, had created a chasm between them. Eli spent the evening restless, unable to settle. He knew he had to talk to Lila, to try and mend the rift he'd so carelessly created. But every time he thought about approaching her, the words stuck in his throat. What could he say that wouldn't make things worse? He paced. He stared out at the dark lake. He even tried to engage Mason in a game of cards, but his mind kept circling back to Lila. As the hour grew late and Mason finally yawned, declaring his intention to hit the hay, Eli saw his chance. Lila was out on the dock, a solitary figure silhouetted against the moonlight. She was sitting on the edge, her feet dangling just above the water, staring out at the inky expanse of the lake. The soft glow of the moon caught the highlights in her hair, making her seem almost ethereal. Taking a deep breath, Eli walked slowly down to the dock. The wooden planks creaked softly under his weight, announcing his approach. Lila didn't turn immediately, but he sensed her awareness of him. He stopped a few feet behind her, the silence stretching between them, thick with unspoken words. "Hey," he said softly, his voice barely a whisper against the gentle lapping of the waves. She stirred, slowly turning her head to look at him. Her eyes, shadowed by the moonlight, seemed to hold a weary sadness. "Hey!" He walked closer, settling beside her, leaving a respectful distance between them. He could feel the residual chill from the night air on her skin, even through her sweater. I wanted to say again about yesterday. What I said. It was wrong. I was out of line." Lila's gaze returned to the lake. "It wasn't just wrong, Eli," she said, her voice quiet, almost flat. "It was hurtful and confusing. You've been different all weekend. And then you lashed out at me, blaming me for what exactly? For living my life." Her voice trembled slightly on the last word. "It felt like you were judging me." "I wasn't judging you," he insisted, his voice earnest. "Never. I could never judge you, Lila. It was me, my own messed up head, my own frustration. He paused, searching for the right words, for a way to explain without revealing everything. I see how strong you are, how resilient, especially after everything with your ex. It just got to me. Seeing you out there, seemingly moving on so easily. He trailed off, realizing how pathetic that sounded. Lila sighed, a long, shaky breath. It's not easy, Eli, she confessed, her voice softer now, more vulnerable. It's never easy. He just never saw me. Not really. Not who I am. He saw what he wanted to see or what he thought I should be, and I wasted years trying to fit into that. She looked down at her hands, twisting them in her lap. Sometimes I just feel like no one ever really sees me. Her words hit him with the force of a physical blow. No one ever really sees me. But he did. He always had. That was the core of his secret, the very foundation of his hidden love. This was his chance. The moonlight, the quiet, the vulnerability in her voice, it all conspired to push him forward. He turned fully towards her, closing the small gap between them, reaching out and gently taking her hands. Her skin was cool, but his touch felt like a jolt. She looked up, her eyes wide, questioning. I see you, Lila, he said, his voice raw with emotion, pushing past the decade of silence. I always have. I see all of it. Your sarcasm, your strength, your wit, how fiercely loyal you are, how kind, how brave you are even when you're scared. His thumb brushed over her knuckles. I see you, more than anyone else ever could. Her breath hitched. Her gaze locked with his, and in her eyes he saw a flicker of something new, something hopeful and deeply vulnerable. A recognition. Her lips parted, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, she began to lean in. Eli's heart hammered against his ribs. This was it. The moment. Years of yearning, of unspoken desire, were about to break free. He leaned in too, his eyes dropping to her lips, their proximity electric. He could feel her breath on his face, the soft warmth emanating from her. Just a few more inches, and the decade of silence would shatter into a million pieces. But then an invisible alarm blared in his mind. Mason's words from the previous night, his quiet warning, don't hurt her. She's been through enough. The deep-seated fear of ruining his friendship, of not being enough, of potentially shattering her fragile peace after her breakup, surged through him like a cold wave. The weight of his secret, the years of self-denial, the colossal risk he was about to take, it all overwhelmed him in an instant. He pulled back, just a fraction of an inch, but it was enough. The spell broke. Lila's eyes, which had been closing, snapped open. The hopeful flicker in them died, replaced by confusion, then the familiar shadow of hurt. I can't, he whispered, the words choked, tasting like ash. His voice was barely audible. Lila pulled her hands from his slowly, deliberately. Why? Her voice was barely a breath, filled with a crushing disappointment that mirrored his own. He looked at her, his heart tearing. He had to tell her the truth now. He had to. There was no going back. Because I love you, he confessed, the words raw, tearing free from his soul. And I'm afraid I'll lose everything if I say it out loud. The weight of the confession hung heavy in the air, a devastating admission offered just as he pulled away. He had spoken the truth, but the fear that had always held him back had, in that critical moment, still won. Lila stared at him, her face unreadable, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and profound sadness. The silent crush was no longer silent, but it had ended not with a kiss, but with a confession born of fear, leaving them both stranded on the edge of a precipice. Chapter 9. Departure. The drive back from the cabin was a study in profound silence. Mason, usually the instigator of carpool karaoke or endless roadside observations, was subdued. He sensed the palpable shift between Eli and Lila, a tension that hummed beneath the surface, thicker and more complex than before. He glanced in the rearview mirror occasionally, catching glimpses of Lila, whose gaze was fixed on the passing scenery, her jaw set. He didn't push, didn't prod, simply steered them towards home, the unspoken weight of Eli's confession hanging heavy in the air. Eli sat in the passenger seat, staring straight ahead, the images of the previous night replaying on an endless loop in his mind. Lila's questioning eyes as he pulled away. His raw, desperate confession. Because I love you. And I'm afraid I'll lose everything if I say it out loud. The way her face had fallen, etched with a mixture of shock and profound disappointment. He hadn't seen her since. Not really. She'd gone to bed moments after his agonizing admission, and this morning she'd been a ghost, moving efficiently, avoiding eye contact, packing her things with a quiet finality that felt like a slammed door. Every mile they put between themselves and the cabin felt like another mile added to the chasm between him and Lila. He tried to convince himself he'd done the right thing. He'd confessed his feelings, yes, but by pulling back, he'd protected her, protected Mason, protected their friendship. He'd preserved the fragile ecosystem of their lives. Friendship was worth more than heartbreak, wasn't it? The thought was a hollow comfort, like trying to warm himself by a dying ember. When they finally pulled up to Lila's apartment building, the relief was mixed with a sharp pang of dread. This was it, the end of the escape, the return to their separate lives, now complicated by a truth that couldn't be unsaid. Mason helped her unload her bags, their usual playful banter absent. Lila avoided Eli's eyes, offering a stiff, polite, "Thanks for the ride, guys," before disappearing into her building without a backward glance. The finality of her departure cut deeper than any harsh word. Mason sighed, running a hand over his face once Layla was inside. He didn't say anything to Eli about what had happened last night, didn't press him further. His earlier warning, "Don't hurt her," echoed in Eli's head, a silent accusation. Mason simply drove Eli back to his own apartment in strained quiet. Eli unlocked his door, the click echoing unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. His apartment, usually a comforting sanctuary, felt cold and empty. He dropped his bag by the door, the mundane action feeling utterly meaningless. The quiet was deafening. No Mason's booming voice, no Lila's soft laughter, just the suffocating stillness of his own choices. He walked to his desk, picking up the framed photograph of the three of them. 15-year-old Lila, braces and sarcasm, stared back at him. He traced her face, a wave of misery washing over him. He had convinced himself he had done the right thing, that friendship was worth more than heartbreak. He had chosen loyalty over love, or so he told himself. But the profound emptiness in his chest, the heavy weight of regret, told a different story. He should have taken the risk. He should have leaned in. He should have said the words, all of them, years ago. He should have fought for her, for what he felt, instead of retreating into the cowardly comfort of silence. He had chosen to protect, and in doing so, he had lost. The thought was a relentless hammer blow, driving deeper the nail of his despair. He had protected their friendship, but at what cost? He had confessed his love, but then immediately recoiled from the consequences, leaving Lila hurt and confused. Eli dropped onto his couch, staring blankly at the wall. The cabin trip, meant to be a simple getaway, had shattered his carefully constructed world. His silent crush was no longer silent, but the honesty had brought him no closer to happiness. He was alone, isolated by his own fear, contemplating a future where Lila might forever be just Mason's sister, a friend he had irrevocably hurt. The regret was a living thing, twisting in his gut, mocking his cautious decisions. He tried to convince himself he'd done the right thing, that the potential heartbreak of rejection was worse than this crushing certainty of loss. He tried, but his heart wasn't listening. Just as he was about to give in to the suffocating silence, to let the full weight of his despair settle, a sudden, sharp knock rattled his apartment door. Chapter 10. The Risk. The sharp knock on Eli's apartment door jolted him from his spiral of regret. It was too firm for Mason, too impatient for a delivery. His heart, already raw and exposed, leaped into his throat. He slowly pushed himself off the couch, the crushing weight of his despair momentarily replaced by a jolt of pure, unadulterated shock. Who could it be? He hesitated, then pulled open the door. Lila. She stood there, drenched. Her hair, usually so carefully styled, clung in wet strands to her face and neck. Rain plastered her sweater to her form, and water dripped steadily from the ends of her jeans onto his doormat. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, her breath coming in ragged gasps, as if she'd run all the way. Her eyes, normally so expressive, were wide, fierce, and utterly unreadable. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The sound of the rain lashing against the window was the only noise in the sudden, charged silence. Eli's mind raced, trying to comprehend her presence. Why was she here? After everything he'd said, after his cowardice on the dock, after the silent, agonizing drive home, "You idiot," she finally whispered, her voice hoarse, barely audible over the rain. But there was no anger in it, only a profound, almost aching weariness. "You absolute, colossal idiot." Eli's stomach clenched. He braced himself for the torrent of anger, the accusations he knew he deserved. But instead, she took a shaky step forward, her gaze locking onto his, unwavering. "You already lost everything," she continued, her voice gaining strength, resonating with a deep, frustrated emotion that sent shivers down his spine. "The moment you let me walk away, the moment you pulled back on that dock, you were so busy being afraid of losing everything, you didn't realize you were already doing it." Her words hit him with the force of a physical blow, slicing through his carefully constructed justifications, exposing the raw nerve of his deepest fear. She was right. He had been so consumed by the what-if of losing Mason's friendship, of facing her rejection, that he'd actually made the active choice to lose her, to lose them, by retreating into his long-held silence. The crushing weight of his regret intensified, but now it was tinged with a desperate, terrifying hope. She was here. She had come to him. Eli didn't think. He didn't analyze. All the years of silent longing, of suppressed desire, of painful what-ifs exploded within him. He reached out, his hands cupping her wet face, thumb brushing over her rain-slicked cheek. Her skin was cold, but the contact ignited a fire within him. Her eyes, still wide, flickered with surprise, then a growing softness. "Lila," he breathed, his voice thick with emotion, the single word, a lifetime of feeling. And then he pulled her in. It wasn't a tentative lean or a hesitant brush of lips. It was a desperate, all-consuming kiss. Years of unspoken words, of stolen glances, of painful yearning poured into that single moment. His lips found hers, urgent and hungry, a desperate plea and a profound answer all at once. She responded instantly, her arms wrapping tightly around his neck, pulling herself closer, molding herself against him. Her cold, wet body pressed against his, but he felt only a searing heat, a blinding relief. The taste of rain and something else, tears, was on her lips, mingling with his. He felt the tremors running through her, matching his own. It wasn't just a kiss. It was the breaking of a dam, the shattering of a decade of silence. It was a silent conversation finally given voice, a promise whispered without words. He poured every ounce of his regret, his love, his terrified hope into it, holding her as if she might vanish if he let go. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, their foreheads rested against each other. Rain still dripped from her hair onto his face, but he didn't care. Her eyes, still wide and luminous, searched his, no longer hurt or confused, but raw with a shared emotion he finally recognized as love. "I was so stupid," he whispered, his voice raspy. "So afraid." Lila's fingers tightened in his hair. She smiled, a small, watery, utterly beautiful smile. And then, so soft he almost missed it, she whispered the words that would forever change everything. "I loved you first." Eli froze. The world tilted on its axis. She loved him first. All those years, all that fear, all that self-inflicted agony. It had been there, waiting for him, all along. A profound, aching realization settled over him, mingling with the last vestiges of his regret. He should have risked everything sooner, so much sooner. But as he pulled her in for another kiss, deeper, more certain this time, he knew one thing. He wouldn't make that mistake ever again. A few months later, the annual Miller family barbecue was in full swing. The scent of sizzling burgers and fresh-cut grass filled the air, mingling with the easy laughter of family and friends. Eli stood by the grill, flipping burgers with a practiced hand, but his attention kept drifting to Lila, who was effortlessly charming Mason's aunt by the picnic table. She caught his eye, and her smile, warm and genuine, sent a familiar thrill through him. Mason sauntered over, a cold beer in hand, and leaned against the grill beside Eli. He watched Lila for a moment, then turned to Eli, a knowing eyebrow raised, a grin spreading across his face. "I knew it," Mason muttered, taking a long swig of his beer. Eli swallowed, a nervous lump in his throat. "Not mad?" Mason snorted, his gaze still on his sister. "Mad? Are you kidding? Took you long enough, you dense idiot." He elbowed Eli playfully, but there was genuine affection in his eyes. "Only if you screw it up." Lila, as if sensing their conversation, walked over, slipping her hand naturally into Eli's. Her fingers interlaced with his, a comforting, permanent gesture. She leaned her head on his shoulder, looking up at Mason. "He won't," Lila said, her voice soft but firm, her eyes sparkling. "Not this time." Eli squeezed her hand, his gaze meeting hers, then Mason's. He had risked everything, he had faced his fears, and in doing so, he hadn't lost anything at all. He had only gained. He looked back at Lila, his love for her now an open, vibrant thing, no longer a silent burden. "I won't," Eli agreed, his voice steady and full of conviction. "Not this time."
And that's where the story ends, not in silence, not in fear, but in love finally spoken aloud. From a decade of longing to a single rain-soaked kiss, Eli and Lila provide that sometimes the greatest risk leads to the greatest reward. If the story moved you, made you feel something real, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share it with someone who believes in second chances and slow-burnt love. Thank you for listening, and until next time, remember, some crushes are never really silent. They're just waiting for the right moment to be heard.